Welcome to my new presentation series. This series is kind of like an Anthony Bourdain travel show, but much less serious, and I don't travel anywhere physically. Each presentation will focus on one country, and I will examine that country based on the 8 dimensions of wellness. The 8 dimensions of wellness is a well-accepted framework for how to conceptualize all-around wellness. Much of the active aging community uses the 8 dimensions of wellness as their base framework for how to maximize the lives of their residents. We use it here at Westminster, and we take it very seriously. The 8 dimensions are physical, intellectual, emotional, social, spiritual, vocational, financial, and environmental. All 8 are interdependent, and it takes significant consideration to balance the 8 dimensions so that true wellness can be achieved. In this presentation, I will take our first country of focus, Australia, and break down each of the dimensions of wellness for that country. It is my hope that you can get a good understanding of the people of each focus country, and maybe be able to escape to a foreign land for a short time. So let's go to Australia. Next, we are going to talk about the intellectual dimension of the 8 dimensions of wellness. Australia's education system is comprised of state-run as well as private schools. State-run schools outnumber the private schools approximately 3-1. The schools are funded nationally, and all state-run schools get the same amount of funding. Australia dedicates 5.9% of its GDP to education, as compared to 6.2% in the United States. There's a focus on having national consistency in education. Students go to 1 year of kindergarten followed by 12 years of schooling. In the 12th year, students receive a certificate from the school, and these do vary slightly state to state, but are accepted at all national universities and most international universities. There is a national testing system that students must take yearly and allows for consistent valuations of all schools in the country. The school year starts at the end of January and then goes until the beginning of December. Summer is flipped in Australia, so Australian students get an 8-week summer break in December and January. There are small breaks between the 4 semesters throughout the rest of the year. Australia is ninth in the world, with over 23% of their adult population holding a college degree. This is a considerable accomplishment because just 30 years ago, only 7% of Australians held college degrees. This shows how important higher education has become in their culture. Culturally speaking, Australians have a little disdain for excessively noting intellectual titles. Historically, during British colonialism, elite British people spoke down to Australians, and this often correlated with men with titles by their names. Australians respect intellectual people who demonstrate their intelligence with good conversation in other ways, rather than pushing their accomplishments as a way of being respected. One of the most highly respected Australian scientists in the world is Elizabeth Blackburn. She won the 2009 Nobel Prize in Medicine for discovering telomeres. Telomeres preserve the genetic material, and the understanding of this field may unlock a revolution in medicine, including turning off the gene that causes aging in humans. Australia is a very informal society. Most students even refer to their teachers by their first name. This permeates throughout the society. Being on time is highly valued in Australia, and if you're going to be late, Australians expect notice. Smoking is not only not permitted in public, Australia is actually one of the most expensive countries for smoking, with a pack of cigarettes costing almost $40. The huge costs on cigarettes have driven down smoking in the Australian population. Just like in America, socializing in Australia often includes drinking alcohol. It is common for people to have a drink after work with coworkers. Though alcohol is common at social settings, it is not considered rude to turn down alcohol in Australia. And yes, barbecues are actually a national pastime. There are plenty of public spaces dedicated specifically to barbecuing, and it is the most common social event for Australians. Nutritionally, Australians do have a lot of similarities to Americans. Their breakfast options are similar, with either cereal and toast or bacon and eggs. They eat lunch around the same time, and it is typically lighter than dinner, which has heavier meats and starches. Australians typically eat a lot of meat, but vegetarian options have grown considerably. Just like in America, many alternative diets, such as gluten-free, are also becoming popular in Australia. Because of Australia's immigrant background, there is a variety of options of foods available. Even though there are a lot of similarities, there are still some considerable differences. Vegemite is a brown yeast spread that is basically a staple in every household and put on crackers. I can't even imagine what brown yeast spread would taste like. Aussies use coconut a lot more than Americans, and one extremely common dessert is a lamington, which is 2 sponge cakes with fruit spread in the middle and dipped in chocolate and rolled in coconut. As previously mentioned, Australians love barbecues, and snags are the most popular item at a barbecue. Basically, pork or beef sausages with spices, then put on some bread and sometimes topped with onions. You can find them basically everywhere. Because the vast majority of Australia's population lives near the coasts, seafood is abundant and loved. A traditional hamburger in Australia is topped with bacon, eggs, pineapple, beetroot, lettuce, and tomatoes. That's heavy. Australians are generally very inclusive to foreigners. This is because the population of Australia exploded with immigrants after World War II. After the war, the government feared that Australia's population wasn't large enough to withstand outside invaders. So a massive marketing campaign to entice immigrants brought over 2 million immigrants in a 20-year span. Australians see themselves as a young nation with hardworking immigrants who have worked together to quickly create one of the best nations in the world. Let's talk about the spiritual dimension of Australia. 50 years ago, 88% of the country identified as Christians. But now, over 1/3 of the country identifies as non-religious, and this makes up the largest category of the country. In contemporary Australian society, just believing is looked down upon. Australians expect people to dig deep and search for spirituality. One of the main reasons Australians cite for leaving traditional religion is a lack of trust. Recent scandals in the church, especially among Catholics, have left Aussies with a poor opinion of organized religion. Now let's talk about the environmental dimension of Australia. Australia lies entirely in the southern hemisphere, hence the seasons are opposite to that of the northern hemisphere. In June, it is winter in Australia, and they celebrate Christmas in the summers. Eastern Highlands, running parallel to the east coast, act as a barrier to the moisture-laden trade winds blowing from southeast. Thus, the east coast receives plenty of rainfall, while there is hardly any rain on the leeward side. This allows for the interior of Australia to be extremely dry and arid. The northern part of Australia has monsoon-type seasons, where all of the rain comes basically at one point, and then an extremely long dry season. Hot summers create low pressure over the land, attracting monsoon winds from the oceans. The tropical desert, found over a large part of the continent, covers the whole of the Western Plateau. It consists of the Victoria Desert, the Gibson Desert, and the Sandy Desert. Summers are hot and winters are cool, and the region receives less than 25 centimeters of rainfall each year. Many thorny bushes are found here and have adapted to withstand the long droughts. Because of the harsh conditions of Australia's interior deserts, over 90% of the people in Australia live within an hour's drive of the coast. How about the physical dimension of wellness in Australia? Well, like in America, there is a concerning trend of increased sedentary behavior and an increase in heart disease and diabetes in Australia. Australians don't spend as much on health and fitness as Americans. Over 50% of Australians spend less than $50 a month, whereas the average for Americans is over $100 a month. Swimming is reported as the second highest form of physical fitness among Aussies, whereas swimming doesn't even make the top 10 in America. This is probably on account that the majority of Aussies live in beach cities. Rugby, soccer, and basketball are the most popular sports in Australia. However, netball is a unique sport that is the dominant sport of women in Australia. Netball has some similarities to basketball, but with no dribbling. The population of Australia in general is less passionate about national organized sports than many other nations. The emotional component of the 8 dimensions of wellness is a little tricky to figure out, but here are some stats. Australia consistently ranks about 10th in the world in different happiness measures. Study after study ranks Australia as one of the most open-minded countries in the world. Though Australians have a lot of good emotional markers, their work-life balance was modestly down the list, yet still slightly better than the U.S. Also, similarly to the U.S., some males have a hard time expressing their feelings, and suicide is the leading cause of death among males 18 to 44 in Australia. The divorce rate in Australia is significantly lower, 2 per 1,000 people, than that of the United States, 3.2 per 1,000 people. The vocational and financial dimensions of wellness will be discussed congruently. What do people do for work in Australia, and what is their standard of living? Well, to start, even through the pandemic and with very strict lockdown measures, Australia still has a lower unemployment rate, 6.8%, than that of the United States, 8.4%. The top 3 industries hiring Australians are healthcare, retail, and construction. The science and tech industry is the fastest growing job market. Australians earn about $3,000 less on average per year than Americans, but pay about $3,000 more in taxes per year than Americans. However, Australia is the number 1 country in the world at distributing taxes to the bottom 20% of their population. Over 40% of benefits are paid to the bottom 20%, and only 3% of benefits are paid to the top 20% of income earners in Australia. In comparison, only about 20% of the benefits are paid to the bottom 20% in the U.S. And the top 20% of income earners in the U.S. actually still receive 15% of the benefits. This helps Australia to have a much better income equality than the United States. Australians get a single-payer healthcare system for their tax burdens, which ends up making their healthcare system much more efficient. Their citizens pay on average $5,000 a year in healthcare, and Americans pay $9,000 per year. And Australia still has the second highest rated quality of healthcare in the world. It is a law in Australia that student loans don't have to be repaid until a student hits the $40,000 a year salary mark. And then maximum 4% is taken out. In the United States, that mark is $17,000, and the loan managers can take 10% out. This is an important law because it changes the financial capabilities of college graduates in their country. Finally, another big distinction is that the U.S. spends $611 billion on defense, whereas Australia only spends $30 billion.